بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد خير الأولين والآخرين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh, and welcome back to Money Matters. And of course, this is a broadcast of the Lamppost Education Initiative. This is part two to a discussion of matters related to of course, economics and finance. And yesterday, during the first lesson, I talked about the importance of understanding riba, its foundation, what it was like during the pre-Islamic period, and what Islam added to the definition of riba. And so today, inshallah, we have a special guest who's going to join us. It's our brother Azmat Zeshan Mukhtar, who is a local here in the Bay Area. Of course, many of you, of course, are not familiar with him, but he's a friend of mine. He is a practicing, he's an economist who's been working in the business and energy sector for about 30 years. And he offers practical advice on how to improve our financial state, financial planning, among other things. I've learned quite a bit from him myself. He is, and in some regards, I would say, is a teacher of mine in that sense. You know, he's taught me quite a bit. And so, inshallah, we're going to bring him on right now, and we hope to have a very illuminating conversation today. Inshallah, those of you who are with us will offer we'll give you an opportunity to ask your questions once we finish our conversation. And then, of course, those who see the recording, we can have a follow-up as well. So we're going to bring him in. So our brother, Zeshan Mukhtar, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you for having me on. It's a great honor to be with you and to be called your friend and your teacher. I'm not sure that title sits well with me, but yeah, it's an honor. I've been following a lot of the talks and the economic stuff and the riba stuff you shared. It's been very enlightening. Thank you for doing that.
Alhamdulillah. Appreciate you joining us today. I actually wanted to begin by, of course, having you talk a little bit about yourself, but one question I would have for you, and perhaps I imagine that some people in the audience would have is that, of course, clearly when we look at you, of course, he's Pakistani or he's something. Of course, he's someone from, some people say he's probably originally from the Muslim world, but of course, your accent, we know you grew up here, right? But some people would say, okay, well, usually Pakistanis who come to the US, they generally go into the STEM field, but when we hear about you, we say, well, okay, you're involved in economics. And what is it that led you down in that particular direction? And then just, of course, talk a little bit about yourself and other ways that in any way you'd like to contribute today, inshallah. Bismillah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I came here when I was 3 years old from Karachi, Pakistan. My family is from India, migrated to Pakistan. So a lot of us have, I think if we go back a little bit of family generations that go back into the north area of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and probably there's some Greek traces over there from Alexander the Great's trek through that area. So a lot of folks there, at the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan and China look kind of Chinese, but then German and Greek as well. So it's a nice gene pool. So alhamdulillah, I'm from Pakistan. I was raised here as a teenager and went through elementary school and high school here. But then I also lived in Saudi Arabia for a while. And my father was an engineer. He worked for a very well-known corporation called Bechtel, and they had special deals in Saudi. So I lived there. But when I came back, my father was laid off. And he told me, he's like, son, I'm going through these business cycles of engineers have a boom and bust cycle. Either they're dying to hire you or they don't have projects for you. So we were kind of in a recession in the 80s, and I took some business classes and I really understood them really well. And kind of with my guidance of my father saying, don't go into engineering, go into business or accounting, I tried to do that. So when I went to UC Santa Cruz, where I enrolled, I had a Marxist economics professor. And I was like, yeah, this guy is a little bit different, you know, socialism and all that stuff. And then I was going to take business classes like CAP-M model, just learn how to be a certified financial analyst. But I found those more boring than my econ theory classes. They talked about Adam Smith. They talked about the Malthusian model of population and Earth. Can the Earth sustain 3 billion people? Those kinds of things really interested me. And then as I got to graduate school, I learned about the Keynesian model. So those are the two schools of thought. It's Adam Smith's pure economics versus the Keynesian financial manipulation model that we're all living through now. Right. Those are all the things that I really got interested in. So I chose economics, you know, knowing that maybe there's a little more you know, a little more of a passion project. I wanted to be an econ professor, and I thought, yeah, I'll do that. So that was my first initial track, jumping into econ. And what I also liked about it is there's a whole reasonable man and nafsi element to it, which is if you give someone 20% more, their nafs will say, wow, I'll buy it. I'll buy it. If you put it on sale, their nafs will say, I'll buy it, because of this nafsi love for money and value. And there was so there was a little bit of, there's a lot of human psychology in economics as well that people don't understand, and the math. So I liked all of that. So that's kind of an answer as to how I got into this. And then I wanted to either be in shipping or logistics or railroads or something. So PG&E, Pacific Gas Electric Company, was all about what I did with my dad. We lived on site, you know, with power plants and things like that. So I worked there, and I really do enjoy what I do. It's taught me a lot, and some of the examples I can give today are because of my, you know, my career. And alhamdulillah, I've had a long career, raised 3 sons, so I'm very blessed. I'm blessed to be here.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, we're blessed to have you with us, mashallah. Yeah. Economics, I think that the average person, you know, really doesn't fully understand, you know, what's meant by economics, or when we hear the term economics, that may be the tendency of people to automatically project outward and say, okay, well, this is like something that the government deals with, or some professor in a university, but it has no direct impact on my personal life. Or in other words, I don't personally need to have any sort of knowledge about economics. And, you know, what's a simple way to understand what economics is, I guess you would say? You know, of course, we know that there are different types of economics, but like for a practical sort of way for an average person to understand the importance and value of economics in our daily lives.
Yeah, so economics starts at the microeconomic level, which is the supply and demand curve of any good that you have, and that applies to our family. We actually subconsciously use economics every day. So like I said, when you go to the store and you expect something to be $5 and then it's 2 for $5, and you're kind of like, yeah, boom, impulse buys. You walk into the store. So we're all doing economics every day. But if you know, if you have that lens on, then you see it. If you don't have the lens on, then you don't see it. So for me, it's always kind of how my brain works, but I'm trying to help people understand how their brain works in terms of their personal finance. So there's a couple things that happen in economics. One is at the individual supply demand level, meaning if the price of peanut butter goes up, then you probably, and you eat a lot of PB&J, then you probably buy less jam because they're complementary goods. So if you love peanut butter and jam, peanut butter and jelly, and the price of peanuts goes up, or there's a famine, then you'll probably buy less jelly. So goods are interrelated because they're packaged together. And so that's an individual level. And then you have substitute goods. So if almond butter gets cheaper, then you might have an almond butter and jelly sandwich. So those are competing goods. So at an individual level, economics is very important. We're all doing it. And the biggest things we do is when we're buying a house, when we're deciding to get married and establish a family budget, and when we're buying a car. These are long-term durable goods. They require debt. And so I really like to talk to people about their car and home decisions that affect them in the 20s. And then there's the production cycle, which is knowing how things are produced. Like, for instance, how much profit is Elon Musk and Tesla making on each car versus Hyundai versus Ford's and Chevy Bolt. These are very important things for when you go get a job. So that's your value you bring to the table. And then at the global level, the government level, there's another layer of economics, which is aggregate demand, aggregate supply. What is Korean steel going to do to American steel? What are the politicians going to do to move these industries around and play them? And then there's the investment banking layer and the banking layer on top of that. So if you don't understand at the graduate level, then you are really missing a very, very detailed, specific idea about how politics works.
Yeah, that's a good point about the issue of politics and how it's connected to like money is extremely important part of that. There's a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that translates roughly as if you are economical, you would never go poor, right? The one who is frugal or is economical will never go poor. Right? That whoever is or keeps a proper balance, of course, of their income and expenditures, that they never go poor. In my experience teaching, because I teach commercial law as Zaytuna, and also in the past, of course, I've taught zakat. And generally, when I begin a class, I would usually ask students, what does it mean to be wealthy? Right? And almost always, everyone would say it means to have a lot of money. Right? I mean, what do you think about that? What does it mean to be wealthy?
Yeah. Wealthy is if your wants are below your resources and your needs are below your resources, it doesn't matter how much money you have. You could be making 100K if you're living in the right situation. You can be very wealthy. There's a movie called Minimalism, and in that movie, they talk about a guy who has 57 things that he carries on his back. And apparently his parents set him up with a trust fund. It's like, I don't know, it's maybe $500 a month. And he's chosen to be free of things. And he travels the entire world on the $500 that he has a month. And he's never worked in his life. And they talk about him. And he lays out all 57 things: the underwear, the shirts, the pants. He has a good pair of shoes. He has a bag, and he has a jacket, and he travels the whole world with these 57 things. So yes, it's not about money. Money is the last thing I mentioned. It's really actually freedom to be able to do what you want to do. And if you can control your wants and your expenses and have an income stream that is greater than that, you're wealthy. And there are a lot of people that are very, very rich, but they're on such a rat race and such a debt race that they can go from rich to poor very, very quickly. And we've seen that in our communities. Those are not the stories they put in front of you in the news. They always tell you, oh, do what the billionaires, So there is a media, we want to be real about the stories and real about the ladder to success.
Yeah, there was what I typically do, like when students answer that way, is like I usually highlight the fact that when we look at the Islamic tradition in particular, that the answer to whether or not you have wealth or you're wealthy actually is given to us when we consider even the types of items or commodities that are zakatable, right? So the Prophet ﷺ gave his information of, okay, well, you have to pay zakat on your gold or your silver, or say your currency, right? Your cash. You have to pay zakat on your farm produce. You have to pay zakat on your livestock, right? So we call it real estate for a reason, right? So people, this idea that, okay, I have a bunch of cash as opposed to land, right? For instance, that makes me richer than the other individual. The individual has a bunch of land, but I have cash, but that cash, and I want to sort of segue into this conversation about the value of gold, right, in American history or just world history itself, is that how like people have been tricked into believing that fiat money or money sort of that's been sanctioned by the government or its value itself is propped up by government actually is more valuable than you actually own in furniture or clothing or food or land, or home and things like that, right? And so this really, and of course, I wish I even myself, I'd even done better, right, in my own life, in this regard. But it's because of I guess you'd say, the miseducation or lack of education about finance and economics that has, sort of slowed down my own sort of economic progress. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that, but then also to get your thoughts about, or just, I guess really what I want to say is, give us some insight on the American and I guess not the American, but the international finance system itself, right? And the value of money. What is money? What role does gold still or have, or doesn't have anymore in the valuation of our money, et cetera? So you start wherever you like. You think that's an important conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned gold, you mentioned hard assets, which is furniture and maybe livestock and land, and then you mentioned fiat money. You used a couple of really big concepts there. So, I mean, going back a little bit in history, is that the 19th century is really where we've had a turning point. We've had millennia of things that were basically the same. You had horses and carriage and food and land and farms and people. And then in the 19th century, boy, we had three really big inventions come to bear. You had the steam engine and the internal combustion engine after that. You had some communication through wires, right? And then you had the petroleum in the form of energy, right? And so the 19th century has exploded in terms of its ability to produce goods and its ability to provide energy and move things. So in 1913, there was a Federal Reserve Act. Congress got together and they decided that after World War I, there was, a lot of chaos. So there was a little bit of instability and recession and depression. And that's when the bankers and the politicians have to come up with a solution. People are asking them to solve the problem. So they came up with the Federal Reserve Act, and the Federal Reserve was born with these 9 bankers that are part of a committee. You can quote me. I might be 7. It might be not. It might be 10. I don't know exactly, but you can look it up. And then they were going to have a separate entity that was going to kind of stabilize the economy through money supply, through money and interest rate and lending. That was kind of their, like, if you can control the air, blood, and stuff in a body that's in an operating room, you can stabilize it while you operate on it, right? So they have interest rates, they have lending, they have money, and they have rules. So they do this kind of thing. They did that. And then in the 1930s, after the Great Depression, they had a Emergency Banking Act, and people owned gold. Gold is always, it's a rare resource that everybody for 5,600 years has appreciated. Gold has been known as the money for 5,600 years. And so gold was held by people because they were farmers and people held land, they held real assets. And so in order to create flexibility in the economy and the ease of transactions, meaning, you don't have to carry a pocket full of gold and be robbed, you can have these paper dollars. They started coming up with paper dollars. The Chinese are actually the first to come up with paper dollars that are backed by the government that says there's gold behind it. So it's the government with the gold on one side and the dollar on the other side. You can trust us. That's how it works, right? So in 1933, there was an Emergency Act, and the government had a ratio of 40% gold reserves for every dollar they would print. They had made these rules themselves, which were working pretty well as the economy was growing. And so they actually were able to legislate the fact that the economy needed people to turn in all their gold. So they had what's called a Gold Act, and everybody turned in their 1 ounce of gold for $20. And it was like, that was the standard of measure. Nobody had a problem with it. And at that time, the fine was $10,000. Right. So that's a lot of money back in 1933. $10,000, a very wealthy man. So going back then, and the economies grew, and then there was World War II, and there were some crises there. And then we get to Nixon in 1971. And Nixon realizes that, man, America's economy is growing so fast. and we're importing so many goods. We're a consumer economy that we're demanding goods. All the goods are coming in. We're exchanging our gold. So the gold reserves in America were going down. So America, being the last big bully standing after World War II, really was able to kind of control the rules. You know, it's the big guy on the basketball court that gets to tell everybody what the rules are, and you're like, yeah, okay, that's the rule now. So that's what we did in 1971. America did that, and then we went from the gold standard, and gold went from it was pressured. It was $20 to $35. It went to $380. So you can see that there's this effect, right? There's this devaluation of gold. And then now in the Clinton times, it went to 800, and it went to 1,200. And right now we're sitting at right around $2,000 for an ounce of gold. Right. So I think your question here is that fiat money, the word fiat, I believe, comes from French, and it means by the pen. And it means it's what's called and since I work in energy, I work in energy trading, but there's a layer of government and law that is not really known, and it's regulation. Regulation is how laws are enacted. And so there's this entire layer of machinery that happens between banking, politics, big money, and the little people, the people that we have to follow the rules. So I've followed regulatory policy for a long time. And the reason why I brought that up is that they regulated the rules. They created the rules to change that. Mm-hmm. And so this is getting into a long answer. I don't want to bore people, but fiat means it's a regulatory asset. It's an asset that was made by the pen. And now the Fed actually enters $100 million into a computer. So when Biden says, you know, my approval ratings are down, we're going to go into a recession. Come on, Jerome Powell, help me out here. Let's engineer a soft landing. So what's happening is Biden and the Fed are working together, and the Fed is printing $100 million. So $100 million are printed on one day. But because we consume, I get $100, I spend $9.90, and I keep 10 cents, or I keep $1. So then that $9 goes to another hand. The $8 goes to another hand. The $7 goes to another hand. So there's this thing called the multiplier effect in economics. And this is how politicians and the bankers control the economy. They give it that shot of adrenaline juice. And so the multiplier effect of a pretty decent savings rate is like $100 million really brings $550 million injection into the economy. But as people spend more and more and more and go into debt more, that $100 million can be almost worth close to $1 billion. Because if I'm spending every cent of that $10 I get, then the next guy's getting the 10, the next guy's getting the 10, the next guy's. So it doesn't deteriorate. It just keeps circulating in the economy.
So that's like debt equals money.
So yeah, the debt is it's like velocity. It has this inertia. It has this speed to it. It speeds up, like heats up. When you boil water, it heats up and you get steam out of it. So we are all living in what's called a fiat. What was the term we called it? It's the fractional reserve banking system. So the fractional reserve, meaning you keep a fraction in the bank. So the bank will say, I'm giving you, Biden, $100 million, but I'm going to keep 30 million in the bank. I'm going to keep a fraction. So now the 30 million is the banker's fee. It's kind of their little deposit. And then if you keep these ratios, then we can play with all this 97 million. So they throw the 97 million into the economy, and the 97 million becomes 970 million. So this is what we're doing. We're actually in a multiplier effect. So things are not real. They're exaggerated. Right.
So what would happen? What would happen? Let's say, for instance, if, God forbid, that the U.S. would sort of dissolve, or any country for that matter, that has fiat currency, it would just sort of, there would be some revolution and the entire government would be disbanded or something like that. What would happen to that fiat money?
Yeah, this was a big criticism of Ron Paul back in the day, that he Austrian economics. You hear about these things. The socialists come in and they want to go back to the gold standard, and then the talking, it's kind of a straw man argument, and they all laugh. and then people who are uninformed kind of be like, oh yeah, we can't believe in that Ron Paul guy. Of course, we can't go back to the horse and buggy days, right? But we can go back to sanity, right? We can go back to sanity. And in Obama's time, I actually went to the website of the World Debt Clock, or the US Debt Clock. There's actually a website about it. And it told you that in Obama's time, if you actually went back to the gold standard, a single ounce of gold would be worth $7,000. That's pre-COVID printing, right?
Yeah.
That's so there was COVID Trump printing, and then there was Biden printing, and then there was Biden printing 2, which was the infrastructure green bill, right? So we've had several levels of printing. So I mean, if you would ask people now, based on the Australian gold ratio, Austrian economic gold ratio, you would say an ounce of gold would be worth $7,000, but that's not going to happen. I don't want everybody on this podcast to rush and try to buy an ounce of gold now, right? But I think the answer to your question is that we can go back to a standard. We need to, one, create stability.
Yeah.
And then when you create stability, you're going to have hardship. So you have to, I'm not for big government, but you have to provide some kind of a safety net for people, which is why they're talking about UBI, universal basic income, which is what they did in COVID, which is if you're going to be forced to sit in your homes, we're going to have to send you checks to be able to sustain yourself, your food and your basic living expenses. So we are at this cliff now, I think, because the European Union has also printed money, and the production, and we've, so we're in a little bit of a pickle, and which is why you have so many people on YouTube, that are like commentators that are talking about recession versus depression, a global economy, and then the solution is these guys, Prince Charles and Klaus Schwab are like, well, we're going to go to a little bit of a simpler thing. It's all the Chinese real estate and Xi Jinping's fault, and we're going to kind of bring this stability, and we're going to bring you a solution. So we are on the cusp of something very, very interesting. I've been saying that we're going to have a recession since 2016. So really off. I don't want to be the guy that is out there with the sign that world is ending every day and I'm wrong, but one day I'm right. But there is a lot more attention to this. And if you watch the news, they are socializing this message, which is soft landing. Something has to happen. So maybe we are at the folks that have created the problem, that are in charge. They seem to be at the point where they're socializing the message that something is going to happen. It's not from you and me. I'm actually, I clip news. I'm like, if Jerome Powell is saying this, then we need to be ready. Don't listen to Zeshan in 2016. Jerome Powell saying something in 2023.
Right, exactly. So I think that try to keep it as, of course, as grassroots as possible, so as simple as possible. I think that based upon what you explained there, that when we think about like money, like say like dollars, for instance, or of course British pounds or whatever it may be, any type of fiat currency, it seems that for most people, when we put money into the banks, we put money there because ultimately we want it to be safe, right? And so for instance, we put in there a certain number of units. Like, I have $1,000 in the bank or 1,000 pounds in the bank. And then 1 year from now or 2 years from now, if I don't touch that money, it still says 1,000, right? And so we assume that, that we actually are saving money, in the process.
Right.
But it seems that the rich people, the wealthy people, actually they take a different tack, that they consider that to be a form of waste of money, right? To actually deposit it in the bank, as opposed to investing it somewhere. And what's really interesting is that the Prophet Muhammad SAW, there's one of his statements where he said that if a person is managing the wealth of an orphan, they should not leave it so that the zakat eats it all up. That they should, that one should do business with that wealth, so that the zakat doesn't simply eat it up. But the reality seems to be that the longer you leave your money in the bank, you don't touch it, or the longer did you just leave it there to sit and you don't invest it, then because of inflation, the buying power of that money actually is being reduced. Right? So you go to the store and people will say, okay, well, the cost of eggs or milk has gone up, and we'll assume that, or just simply price gouging on the part of the store owner, right, or the gas station. Right, when it actually turns out that really is because of inflation, because of printing money, too much money, or things like that. Would that be sort of an accurate way to describe things in your view?
Yeah, I mean, wealth, like you mentioned, could be a pile of dates, right? But those are consumable. I mean, if you don't sell them after a certain time, what's going to happen to your wealth? You have to trade it, just like anybody who trades a commodity, oranges or anything that's perishable. When you get fresh fish, that's a very liquid market, because a fresh fish is only fresh till midnight, right? Tomorrow it's not a fresh fish. So you've got to sell it, make money, and you've got to get rid of it, right? And so there's different kinds of wealth. There's trade where you have to do it very quickly, like I mentioned. And then there's other things where you can actually invest in cash, which slowly deteriorates. You don't really notice it, but because of inflation, if you sat down and had $1 million to buy a house a couple of years ago, that same house is 1.4. You're buying something much smaller. So your buying power has shrunk. So that's what people call inflation. And then you mentioned the wealthy. Well, what do wealthy do? The wealthy, they invest, right? They own the $1 million house that you go out and chase it for 1.4, right? So in inflation, someone's always winning and someone's always losing. It's a zero-sum game in a sense. So when you're chasing something and you're not able to get the amount that you wanted or you had, someone else has gotten that value from you. And that's what economics teaches you, is that there's a saying that says hunting isn't a sport because the deer doesn't know he's playing. He's standing there having a lick of grass, and then all of a sudden he's in a sport. No, that's not a sport. You don't want to be in that sport. You want to be in a jiu-jitsu sport where you're playing and the other person knows you're playing, and you know the rules. If you don't know the rules of the game you're playing, and the other person knows all the rules and the tricks, and they've got experience and they've spent 1,000 hours rolling with a tough opponent, even though you know the rules, you're going to get choked, right? So we want to be, we don't want to be the deer, right? You want to know the rules, and you want to be thinking about the rules, knowing how to roll so that you can play the game. And so that's where, my thing comes in, is I really like teaching folks about the game and the rules, and how do you little people take, how does David take down Goliath, right? How does David get what he needs to get, right? These are the stories that we have, is that it's possible with Allah's barakah, to win and to win for your family. And if you're not playing, as a head of a household, you have to learn this responsibility, just like you have to get up in the morning and chase the worm and get it, right, for your family. Every man has that task. So we have that leadership task. So this is what these things are about, is to try to teach this thing. And then if you watch the news and you consume, Apple pushes news to you. They tell you, today's the day to think about the submarine all day. Today's the day to think about what the Kardashians did. Today's the day, oh my gosh, so-and-so is Epstein. I don't know, right? So it just, there's this huge machinery that's telling you, pushing images to you, and you have to set yourself aside and earn your keep and learn how to do something with it, and you'll succeed, inshallah. And do it with the rules that you taught me, which is the riba rules. Like, what is gold and silver? What is dates, barley, wheat, and oil, or salt? Right. Things, right? So thank you for doing that. This is an awakening for folks, right? You can be on YouTube. I tell people you can be on YouTube and get very, very wealthy with Allah's support. Or you can be on YouTube watching all kinds of things that will take you nowhere. The most harmless ones of them are cat videos. I didn't know that cat videos are so popular on YouTube, but you know, there's a lot worse things you could do, but alhamdulillah, there's a lot of benefit. And I have actually learned a lot being on YouTube, but watching the right folks.
Yeah, mashallah. Yeah. I mean, so I think that I guess one way to sort of summarize what we've covered so far, or at least the sort of what appear to be sort of the main points, are that fiat money or money is really only as good as the government says it is. In addition to the fact that its buying power is decreased over time, and that the average person should be thinking a little bit more about investing in things that are much more real, right, or have some type of true utility, right, as opposed to simply leaving your money sitting around in the bank, because of course crises, they happen, right, and we've seen recent crises. And one of the things I mentioned yesterday related to the question of debt slavery and subsistence slavery, and I do think that that's an accurate way to characterize the situation of a very large portion of people in society today, when we consider the fact that so much credit has been sort of allotted or provided to the public, and it seems that that's what's made it possible for us to live the sort of luxurious type of lives that we do live, even though so many people still see themselves as poor. You know, that people, they have phones, they have computers, they have internet, they have cars, they have a refrigerator full of food, you know, everything, you know, and people still, I'm a poor person because when I compare myself to this other individual, I don't have as much or even half as much as that other person does have, right? So there's a lot of ingratitude on top of that as well. So So it seemed to me that the crypto industry, or essentially like Bitcoin, for instance, you know, being the pioneer in this particular regard, was born in somewhat of an attempt to, I guess you'd say, break away from the control, I guess you would say, of governments. You know, the government sort of mandated money, right? Say, listen, no, we're actually going to try to build an international community which actually, you know, invests or actually trades in its own currency. That this is what we consider to be valuable. That's what they consider to be valuable. This is what we consider to be valuable, and we can live outside of the control of the government, you know, or the international system. Of course, at least that's the aspiration. It seems, you know, at least with Bitcoiners, you know. And I mean, what are your comments about, you know, the crypto industry? What do you think about it?
Yeah, so you know, just going a little bit of history and background here, but I heard about it in 2013, 14, and then I started really studying it, and probably in 2016. But you know, the crypto Bitcoin didn't show up on the earth like boom like that. It's computing power, it's the internet, the ability to store information on multiple, they call it nodes, but really storage on computers, and then blockchain technology, which is it's a journal entry that kind of locks itself. It's like pages in a journal, so as opposed to a database like an Oracle database. It's a different kind of a database, without getting too technical. And Bitcoin didn't show up. The first thing that really put power in our hands was PayPal. You know, there's early times where it's like, oh, you either had a credit card merchant website, or you could do PayPal and pay as a guest or pay as a user. So PayPal to me was so revolutionary because I send money to Pakistan to my mom, and I use the SWIFT system, which is the international banker wire system. So I can actually go put $1,000 in my pocket. I can fly through Turkey, and I can be in Pakistan in 30 hours, and I can hand the dollars to my mother. But then I use the SWIFT system, which the bankers created in the 70s. And it takes me 3.5 days. And I'm like, that's bad, right? That's old. And all of a sudden you have SWIFT system, which is 3.5 days, me personally, which is 1.5 days. And then now we have PayPal. Wow. Oh my gosh. My bank account is linked. There's this people in the middle. You push a button and they take what's called, in my business, people don't know this, they take what's called the settlements and counterparty risk. Right? So what is that? I work in energy settlement systems. So when people critique Bitcoin stuff, it's like, if you could tell me about what a settlements counterparty system risk is, I'll listen to you. But if you can't, then don't talk to me, please.
Mhm.
So people have to understand who they're getting their information from, right? And who really, really knows. So PayPal was so revolutionary. And who's behind PayPal? Musk, okay? We know he's a genius, but then there's this other guy named Peter Thiel. He's the billionaire that he doesn't want to be known. He doesn't want to be known. He doesn't want to be a Zuckerberg. He doesn't want to be a Bezos. He wants to be unknown. He's very well known in Silicon Valley. So
is he the same guy? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but is he the same guy who actually caused the bank run on Silicon Valley Bank? Because I saw an article that mentioned, I think it was Peter Thiel, that he actually advised a number of the big investors in Silicon Valley Bank actually to take their money out because of, at any rate, you can, you may not know that, but I remember reading something about that, but his name, he came up there.
Yeah, he's a legend in the VC venture capitalist circles. He had his own fund, but he's the first backer of Facebook. People don't know that. He wrote Zuckerberg the biggest check as an individual. He knows what he's doing. And so I think we're getting into Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is claimed there's God's money, which is gold. There's government money, which is fiat. We've already talked about it. And then there's this new thing called the people's money, right? Bitcoin is the people's money. We're going to be beyond governments. They're not going to be able to shut us down, blah, blah, blah. But I mentioned you need databases and you need internet and you need storage. So yeah, Bitcoin can be all over the world, but all of us are dependent upon AT&T, Comcast, Xfinity. So the government has regulatory, and I mentioned this power before that people don't realize, the government has regulatory authority over internet providers, over data warehousing companies, over Amazon Web Services. Yeah, your pictures are uploaded on Amazon Web Services, but government has regulatory authority over all these corporations. They can shut them down. They can freeze stock. Like you saw, Twitter stock got frozen. Silicon Valley Bank stock got frozen. So one day it's all capitalism. The next day it's like, well, we don't think it's safe, so here we shut it down. So someone always has a switch, right? And so I think going to Bitcoin and going into cryptocurrencies, it's a very, very Wild West kind of open thing for the last, I think maybe 2011 to 2016. It was pretty open. You could have gotten away with moving Bitcoin around quite a bit. It was $3,000, $5,000, $10,000. Now it's $30,000 and everybody's talking about it. And there's a lot of regulatory challenges around it because the government wants to regulate it for the safety of the individual. They want to create a commodity with rules around it, and then they want to tax it. So people don't know that the crypto executive order by Biden and the infrastructure bill has an estimated governmental revenue of $28 billion in tax from crypto. So if people are making capital gains on crypto, they'll pay tax. So the government is assuming they're going to get $28 billion in tax revenue from capital gains. And then certain people tell me it's not real. I'm like, well, your government thinks it's real. They think they're going to be getting money from people, right? And so it's a very technologically advanced thing. People who are getting into it are speculators. I never ever recommend anyone to be a speculator. You're just FOMO. You're just fear of missing out, and you can lose your money. But if you want to learn about it and you have the ability to invest something, which means you're saving, if you're a saver and you're budgeting and you want to learn, like I said, the jiu-jitsu, and you're in the game, then you can play a little bit, and we can talk about that in another session. But cryptocurrency has opened up this whole world, and the SWIFT system makes the SWIFT system look bad. Now 3.5 days, come on! I mean, kids are Venmoing money while they're riding a skateboard at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, for the sake of our audience, I think that it would be probably good to explain to them what you mean by that when you talk about the SWIFT system and 3 or 4 days, or what exactly you mean by that.
Yeah, so the banking, if you want to send money from USA to Pakistan, because your mom, needs money, or she's got a food, she's got her wealth here. We use the international banking wire system at PG&E, in my company and all companies. We all use wires. When oil is bought from Saudi Arabia, you put it on a tanker, and you're an American tanker, you wire Saudi the money for the crude. We're using the SWIFT system. It's actually owned by the American bankers. It's actually a American-owned software company, but it runs on wire. It runs on a computer system that validates everything slowly, and then when it validates it, it releases it. So when you write a check, right, the bank says, "Oh, your money's not available for 2 days because we want to validate the check and go get it from the account." Then it doesn't bounce. So there's all these validations that are happening in the wire system that make it very secure. And when you go to Bitcoin, you're down to 20 minutes of validation. Right. And when you go to other cryptos that are being developed, you could go to 100 million transactions in a second, because that software is doing all the validation. They're taking the settlement's counterparty risk. So I think that the case here is I think we wanted to talk about the history, what is really real. I think two of the topics that we might have hit around but really didn't give great examples about is inflation, right? Inflation. We all feel it right now. The pocketbook, the news tells you, oh, the Dow is up, everything's great, and the people are walking, filling the tanks of, buying eggs, meat, milk, sugar, and gassing up cars and going, man, well, what am I going to do now? I'm being pinched here. So there's the reality and the news. So really, the news doesn't want you to understand your reality. Your reality is circle your wagons, right? Save. So I'm here in the personal investment, personal budgeting map now, I'm giving you a mindset. You gave us the rulings on riba, mashallah. So we have that as our foundation, the Quran and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he's so, I mean, you and I could talk for an hour about the things I learned about commodity trading, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was so ahead of his time. The time and the fee-based riba, there's these different elements, and he made all those examples. So I don't want to go there because it's going to take long, but I think for the personal map, our foundation is Quran and Sunnah and the Hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what we need to stay away from. And God uses the word war, which you mentioned yesterday. And then, managing your family, sometimes you have to be the bad guy, but you have to be the leader, right? And so managing the family is save $1,000 in your account, your checking account. That's goal. Right. And the reason is the debt noose, right? You need air. And if you don't have a little bit of $1,000 and you lose a tire, you get a tire puncture, your car needs to be towed, you have a toothache, you're going to go, if you don't have the $1,000, you're going to go and hit a credit card, right? So you have to have real cash. So that's step number one. Once you have $1,000, you want to do is pay off your debt. Your debt is like you're trying to fill a cup of water and there's a huge hole in it. Right. That's debt. That's why the Prophet ﷺ told us stay away. Quran told us stay away from it. So you don't want to pour water into a glass to drink it until you patch the hole. So that's number one. So you do this thing called the waterfall method, which means your 20% interest rate, pay it off because it's harming you worse than your 10. Then you're 10%, then you're 7%, then you're gone. And always get a zero interest credit card, pay it off before it's due. That's what I do. Every 18 months, I have a credit card that's zero interest. I don't get the flight miles and all the fancy stuff, but I'm away from interest, right? And I have time to pay it off. So the $1,000, the waterfall method, pay off your debts, clean up your finances, meaning don't get into debt with cars and leases and those kinds of things. Buy what you own and try to save, and then invest. Once you've got 3 months of savings and some kind of liquid investments, then you try to invest for wealth to get financial freedom that we talked about, right? And a financial planner told me, he's like, when I was 27, she's like, you buy this house, you stay in this house, your income will grow. just stay in this house. Your income will keep growing and you'll invest more and more and more and more. But if you buy another house, you buy your $500,000 house and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's too small. Let me go buy $1 million house. Now you've reset the game. So that's why the millionaire next door in America that we hear about, all the OGs that we have, the boomers, they bought their house to live in it and pay it off, right?
Right.
We have people who are like, well, I'm going to get a starter home, then I'm going to get the, this, and then I'm going to get that. I'm like, yeah, you're just going to keep chasing it, right? With debt. So I think the money, I mean, we're all, we've gone 50 minutes, alhamdulillah. So the mindset here is that those three things, the $1,000 so you're not being choked in the debt, and then you have a little bit of freedom. And then when you get the 3 months savings, so that in case you lose your job, you need to interview and things like that. You can go to the interviews, you have a job, you don't have to leave your home. That's getting the noose off your neck. Because now, right, taking it off, the noose, the debt noose. And then the last thing I would say is then you try to build wealth by having a small need and want mindset, and then everything you have extra, doing something smart with it. And then the next thing is there's a lot of people who will help you invest soundly. You can go to a certified financial planner, and you can find sound investments that are very stable. So for instance, Canadian National Railway, not a very, very talked about stock, but Warren Buffett owns it. And he owns it because he knows that Canada is like this country that's long and thin. All the people live in this one line. And so when goods come in from Vancouver and Toronto, they got to go to the center. So this is stock. This is how investors think. They've got to go to the center. They got to go to Calgary. They got to go to Alberta. So he invests in Canadian National Railway because he knew that stock was undervalued. No one talks about it. And he knew that if he buys it, he's going to get immediate value and he's going to get dividends. And dividends are like when your camel is pregnant and gives you another camel, right? Companies provide dividends, and dividends are, if you invest in a halal company, you'll get halal dividend babies, right? I call it your stock is giving birth to a little baby stock. So if you invest $52 in electric utility, every year they'll give you $2. So your $52 become 54. And then you put in another 50, and then you get another 54, and you kind of compound, right? So there's a lot of safe investments. And then the last bit, once you have a lot of investing, you want to invest for a home run. You want to hit base, like, I'm sorry to use sports analogies, but you want to get the base hits with the Canadian.
They work.
Yeah.
I think they work.
They work. And then every now and then you want to swing for the fences. So you want to have a little bit, 5%, 10%. When you're a leader of your family and you've done all the other things, you're solid, then you swing for the fences and you do a little bit of Bitcoin if you know about it. If you, a little bit of like, this company that someone's talking about, but you've got to read 5,000 words about it. You've got to talk to people who really they're not mentally they're not religious about it. There are people who are religious about Bitcoin. They just get there's people who are so religious about Tesla. Like, it's not a religion. And study the company with a clear mind. And then you can hit, and I always tell this example is like, I was buying goods on price.com when Amazon was a very small company, and I discounted mentally. I thought, this is just a bookstore. But Amazon was reinvesting and inventing, and Amazon's logarithm was actually better. It's not what Amazon was then. Amazon was logistically doing something very genius. And so I missed out on it. I thought price.com and eBay are the future. And if any one of us had invested $10,000 in Amazon because we really understood the economics of it, the power of what it was doing, the algorithm, $10,000 in 2007 would have given you $12 million wealth in 2019.
Yeah, it's fun.
Right. So this is America. This is America's, like, a lot of people say, oh, America this, America that, and this and that. Do you understand what the rule of law and the regulatory stability that you have here grants you? it's even though there's all this money printing going on, it's a
Yeah.
game, and there's a rule, there's a way to win the game, and you have to be smart. You have to trust people. You have to trust in Allah, and risk is written by Him, but Him alone. But you have to really play this game, right? And so that's where, you know, alhamdulillah, you're teaching them about the foundation, and I'm here, inshallah, trying to motivate them to not watch those cat videos and watch, you know, smart people. Don't get me wrong. The news, CNBC, they put mad money on the TV every day. And that guy, Jim Cramer,
shameful.
turn the sound off. First, turn the sound off and watch him. He looks like a pouting toddler. Okay, anyone who has that lack of integrity, you should be wary of what you're consuming. And then the other thing is, he was touting Silicon Valley Bank stock 2 months before it crashed.
Right.
And he's telling people Bitcoin is poison, and Bitcoin has gone from 3,000 to 30,000.
Right.
These folks are not your friends. They're working for the folks that are making this inequality in the world worse. And they're giving you, you know, Shaitan talks to you. If you listen to him, you get something. You have to know not to listen to, who not to listen to. And so, you know, I'm here trying to motivate people and say, there's folks that can, you know, form a club, a halaqah, where you understand the rulings of your deen, but also have a group of guys that talking about investments, talking about how to lead your family, talk about maybe that one of them knows of a deal and you partnership, but you have to do that. So inshallah, I've given you guys background.
Yeah, mashallah.
The motivation.
No, really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. I wanted to see if you have a little bit of time to hang around for maybe a couple of questions that maybe some of our audience members may have.
Sure. No,
your time is a little short, but no. So I mean, go ahead. What did you say? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I said that's the fun part.
All right. Yeah. So if anyone, inshallah, has any questions for our economist brother Zeshan, inshallah, please do share those questions so we can delve a little bit deeper into this particular topic. Extremely important topic. And of course, one thing that we haven't, while we're waiting to have someone write a question or two, one thing we really haven't delved into is, and you started to move in that direction. We haven't delved into like the sort of the globalist sort of order itself, and we haven't spoken about like the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and its role in the global order, right, of things, among other, you know, sort of central banks, the BIS, et cetera, right? You know, so I mean, would you have anything that you wanted to say about that and its relevance to a Muslim audience or a general audience, whatever you may want to contribute?
Yeah, I mean, I really love Adam Smith. I thought Adam Smith was about economics of for like an island like Iceland. I think Iceland is a great example because it's a $18 billion economy, and they have things that they offer the world. You know, they have great grass and cows and those kinds of things, and so they have a strength in their economy, and they want to trade with other people. They want to trade with Scotland, Denmark, and Ireland, who are close partners. So there's this whole like pure economics part of it. But we're so far away from that world now. We are in and I mentioned this, John Maynard Keynes. He was an economist. He was very close to the royals in England, and the Rothschilds have their money there in the vaults. And so he was very big in creating the Keynesian model for running an economy. And that's what's happening with the Federal Reserve. Jerome Powell and Christina Lagarde, who's the head of the IMF, or she was the head of the IMF. These guys are the central bankers of the world. So now we are gone away from the trading of strengths. You know, Pakistan silk for Iceland wool. This was the world. Pakistan silk and agriculture for Iceland wool. That was how countries did relations back in the day. But now Pakistani silk is all bought by international bankers as a commodity. just like barley, right? You mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And then Icelandic wool is a commodity, and they have the resources. They have barriers to entry. There's barriers to entry that you and I cannot buy. I can buy 1 barrel of crude, but I cannot buy or finance a tanker. Right. So big money is now the jiu-jitsu rules. And so the investment bankers and the bankers are now commoditizing everything. They're turning everything into a commodity, and they're playing this game with nations and nations' money, right? So the example that I would give you is that I had an investment opportunity when I was young, and I met these guys, and what they were doing is they were betting on heating oil in the northern states of America, like Montana and Idaho. People who live there don't have gas lines, so they buy heating oil to sustain them in the winter. And these guys were like, if you give us a $10,000 investment, we'll go buy and corner the market on heating oil. And then when these people need their heating oil and the temperature drops, we will control the market and we'll gouge them. And then we'll make a profit. So you give us $10,000, and the next winter, we're going to give you on average $17,000 to $20,000 back. You can make 70% on your money. I was like, wow, this is a really good investment opportunity. You know, I'm an economist. This is pure economics here. I like this. This is me using my brain to put a stranglehold on someone else, right? But those folks who are buying the commodity oil, they don't know they're playing. And so as a Muslim, I felt really bad about that. I'm like, am I really going to do this? Am I really going to do this? It's trade. It's allowed. But cornering the market in the summer on something that's going to be needed in the winter, Allah asks us, you know, how much is enough? Is enough? And so do I really want to have my middle class American lifestyle? I was blessed. My father brought me to America and educated me here. I'm like, am I going to do this? I didn't do it. Alhamdulillah. I wasn't practicing the religion the way I am now, alhamdulillah, but something really sit wrong with me. It was unethical to me. It was not ethical. And so I didn't do it. Now, the reason why I give that example is because there are hundreds of commodities in the world that we, the little people, need. You know, I'm going to need something in August, you know, and I don't know I'm going to need it, right? But these guys are cornering the markets on all of it. Even your milk. I've gone to a milk farm in California. Said, where do you sell the milk? He's like, I sell it to the milk conglomerate, and they give me a spot price. I was like, wow, you don't have a set price and a buyer of milk. You have to send it to this milk exchange. Your milk, your California cows, that's where the milk goes. So I think the question that you asked me is that, what is the IMF? The IMF is this example that I gave you on a global level, because they've written the rules. They have the phones that all the politicians will call for, because politicians need ratings. So make no difference. Politicians live for satisficing. They don't try to come up with the optimal solution. They want to satisfy the minimal solution that will get them the 51 share of the votes. That's not truth. That's not optimizing. And as an economist, I want to see optimization. So I know politics is about the folks who are in power writing the rules with another group of folks that have the money to affect the rules. And so we are playing along. We have to do our best. So that's kind of a me example of how big the IMF and the investment bankers are. And they have a ratio. They have a ratio of dollar, pound, euro, Japanese yen, and German Deutschmark, and then they added China to the mix. So there right now there were five currencies in this basket. They call it the basket. And now they add China because China's economy became so big, like in 2016 or 2017. So they get to write the rules. They get to add China, and they're slowly adding India. So now all our currencies are pegged to this basket of goods. And one of the things that America has is America has a disproportionate share from when it was the biggest bully on the block back after World War II. And the reason why I'm bringing up this example is we also have dying currencies. So if you wanted to buy if you wanted to take a Pakistani rupee and exchange it for a Tunisian dollar, Both the banks don't want either of those. They're going to say, you Pakistani guy, go get a dollar, go get a US dollar,
Right.
then trade it for the Tunisian dollar. So you have
Right.
to go through this middle currency. And that's the power of the dollar. That's the petrodollar. Because a Tunisian doesn't want a bunch of rupees in his pocket. He doesn't want Pakistan rupees in his pocket. Not because he hates Pakistan, but because it's no value to him. He's going to have to change it to a dollar. So everybody is hoarding dollars, and the dollar is the preeminent medium of exchange in the world. It's the government that everybody sort of is the strong man government, and it's been established since the oil days in the 70s. And so I think you giving the IMF example, that's kind of what I have to say about it. So hopefully that's the answer.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair. So here's our first question. Jazakallah khair. Why every time? Why? I guess why does every time currency printing happened, or well, why every time currency printing happens and inflation ensues in developing countries, currencies depreciate against the USD and the euro, right? So I guess it's asking like, why does that occur, right? And so, and you somewhat alluded to it already, right, in your previous statement about the petrodollar.
Yeah, even though the euro and the American dollar are being printed, and you would think that would devalue them, the other countries are so dependent upon that medium of exchange that even though the dollar's going down, it drags the other currencies down with it faster.
Right. Yeah.
So if I'm a big guy and I'm falling, and I got a couple of toddler kids around me, and I just grab them to brace me, I'm going to take them down faster. Like their fall will be much more violent than mine, right? Yeah. So even though the dollar is been devalued, we are still consuming. America, United States consumer, the average person here, consumes so many goods because of their ability to take on debt that we are the biggest eater on the block. And when you're the biggest eater on the block, everybody who's making food wants to send it to you. So the dollar will still be valued. That's dollar. People keep putting those BMWs and Audis on those trucks and those trains and those ships, and they keep coming here. And the reason is because we are the biggest consumer. Our economy is based on the consumption. So I think the answer to your question is, and the other thing is, America does play around internationally with the money supply. So even though the dollar has gotten weaker because of printing, they know exactly the timing of how to take dollars out of the international market. And they also play around with US bonds, and this gets into a little bit more complexity. But people talk about, oh, China might dump the bond and who owns the bonds. So even though we're falling, we're not falling as fast as some of these other countries. You know, petroleum is not being produced in Pakistan, right? They are dependent upon exports. And so the less you produce, the less you have, the more you're dependent upon others who are even not doing great things. And you have to ask yourself, if the World Bank has been around for the last 80, 70 years to help developing countries not be developing, why are 80 years later they're still developing?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a trap. I believe that the World Bank loans have come with 42 conditions on them. And when you take a World Bank loan, as Pakistan has done, a lot of countries have done, you actually give the control of your money supply to them. They get to control your exports. So, you know, they, meaning the bankers, the World Bank, the people who are on the board of the World Bank get to dictate the agreement. And then the agreement is signed by these countries who take on the debt. So there is a they that we know, and it's the bankers. The World Bank is doing that.
In other words, those are the people with the real power.
Yeah.
Right.
And China does it a different way. China is a land and agriculture bank. So when China gives you conditions, and you know, Pakistan has done something called the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, where China came in and built all this infrastructure for them. China wants rights, but they don't necessarily do it in terms of controlling your money supply, but they want that land. They want access to the Indian Ocean. They get to control all the railways, and they can control your ports. So, people who give
real
you
estate.
conditionally, right?
Yeah, real estate. They want real wealth.
They want real wealth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what goods you have, they want those goods too. So the train goes both ways. It comes down from China to the water, but they take stuff up at a good price. They want contracted prices for Pakistani agricultural goods, and they get those as well.
Right. Okay, as a second question. So any suggestions for making a living will? Thoughts on UIF mortgages? And should I take part in my employer 401k without much knowledge about what they're investing in? Jazakallah khair. Sound like a question for both of us, but you can go ahead and answer first.
Yeah, I'll answer the 401k. So there's just like there's a waterfall of debt, most expensive to least. There's a ranking of investments, and your 401k is written. It's actually a law, 401k, section whatever 401k, right? That's what it's called. But it gives you the right to have tax sheltered money. So if you put $1,000 a month and you put 1,000 into the 401k, you only pay tax on 9,000. So you get that money to invest without taxes. That's a huge gain. That makes it 1/3, 25% bigger, right? Off the bat, you've won by 25%. Now you don't have a lot of control. So I'll give you my example. I have 23 funds that I can invest in my 401k. 10 of them are bonds. So the Shaykh said, riba's out. 10 of them, forget it. So my 23 options are now 13. And then in the other ones, there's like large company stock, medium company stock, international funds. So I put it all in large company stock. Large company stock is Apple, Nike, and may Allah forgive me, I don't have control, but probably Visa and MasterCard. But that's all they're offering me. So I have to do the best that I can. Now, if I can put it in better funds, of course I could put it in better funds. I would rather invest in all of Apple and Nike, knowing that those companies are not Visa, but you're taking on more risk because you're dependent on only 2 companies. So I would say that do your 401k right away, do the best that you can, do your research, and A'udhu Billah, put it in there. And then try to stay out of personal debt. Of course, we could do in the IMF world, you're never going to escape riba. So some people come to me and they're like, oh, you shouldn't invest in anything then. It's like, no. We have to live in a world where we try to breathe the cleanest air we can breathe and drink the purest water we can drink. So I would say, yes, invest in your 401k. You're getting a tax advantage right off. You can't touch the money till you're 59 and a half. But when you switch from company to company, it's always there and you can move it with you.
Alhamdulillah. Now, with regard to the question about living will, there are a couple of services that are available. I know Shaykh Joe Bradford he does work on wills, but there's also another company, subhanAllah, ShariaWiz, I believe it's .org or .com. Actually, even I've actually contributed to some of the information related to inheritance on that particular website, but they also specialize in wills, among other things, which are based upon state regulations, so they base it on the state that you're in, so I think they may be even a bit more dynamic than the work that Sheikh Joe Bradford is involved in. They may have a little bit more help, but between those two, when it comes to writing a living will, you might want to look at those websites. The issue of UIF mortgages, this is, of course, in the Islamic finance sector, so fundamentally, I would say that, that you really don't have much to worry about. I think that that your mortgage through that particular company is fine. Of course, the question is whether or not is a smart thing to take on long-term debt overall. But depending on, of course, your salary, because everyone wants to own a house. I would like to own a house, but you should definitely just make sure that you're making the most reasonable decision that's possible anytime you do those type of things. So here's another question. Do you have any specific recommendation for people to listen to on YouTube about investments?
Let's see. I think there's the rules. First, you got to know the rules of the game and how to research. So I've done a YouTube talk called Budgeting Financial Literacy for Muslims. It's kind of like part 1. And then I got into part 2 because I saw that on YouTube there wasn't anything for Muslims. So I did it. And if you search MCC East Bay and you search my name, you'll see one called Basics of Financial Literacy, and the second one's called Saving and Investing. So I go through a couple of stocks. I go through a PG&E stock, I go through a utility fund, and I go through some risk, and I go through a REIT, like a real estate investment trust. So it's kind of like the basics of how to research, and I show the websites and how you can go on Yahoo Finance and see it. So I would recommend that, number one, you watch that and kind of know how to research, look at holdings, look at dividends. And then there are some people that are trying to help you, but I think in the specialty you're in, be very careful who you're talking to about investment advice. Definitely not CNBC. I listen to Bloomberg because I know their reputation is about finance, so they won't spin you too crazy. But I think talk to people that you trust, that you can, there's some real estate investors, there are folks who are in real estate, there are folks in, depends on what you want. I'm also available to do financial counseling, but I don't give investment advice. I can look at people's ideas and help. So there are resources. And there are some really great stocks. I mean, sorry for the sports analogy. Every now and then you get a Michael Jordan and a LeBron coming along. And like I said, if you invest $10,000 in Amazon at the right time and you have that money, you've invested smartly and you've done it in the right time and you've done your research and Allah's behind you, you can really do well. So there is research that you can do, but stick to known sources. Yahoo Finance is good to research your stock, and then you can ask people if something's good, and stick to the industry. So if you're a nurse, you're a doctor, pharmaceuticals, things like that, stick to the things don't just go off of what hearsay you get. So sorry I don't have specific people. I don't want to you to somebody that might start you for, and that happens too. Trusted YouTube guys have gone awry because they're offered a lot of money for a specific hydrogen power recommendation, and you go buy hydrogen stock and it's just going to be in the dump 5 years. I've fallen into that. So I'm a smart investor, but I've also made my share of $7,000 and $8,000 mistakes. Trust me, it hurts.
So this question says, Sheikh Hamza says, use cash as much as possible to slow down this conversion to electronic money. At the end of the day, even Bitcoin is owned by the establishment, correct? And then he follows up and says, if the establishment in the United States wanted to shut down Bitcoin, they could have.
Yeah, so cash is good because it does force cash is the best thing for you to budget. So when you put $100 bill in the wallet on one side of your wallet and $100 bill for the next week, you're gonna it's immediate feedback that you have spent the money. And you'll go home, if you stick to your rule, you'll go home spending the $100 and you'll keep the other $100 for next week. It's a tangible feedback loop. And this is what I tell people. If you want a budget, leave the house with cash because you can see it going down your wallet. If you're using debit card, there's a lot of percentages and things that you can't keep track of. So I would recommend using cash when you're budgeting. So number one, that's a great tool. And again, I think the more Americans use cash, the more the bankers will see that there's a resiliency to just going all digital. All digital comes with information because then they can track all your expenses. So let me give you this example. Target is charged sorry to use the word Target, maybe your food vendor, your halal kebab place is charged a few percent, and you're charged interest to use your own money. right? They're getting paid on both sides. That's why Visa, people who own Visa are these bankers are the richest people in the world. They're getting the vendor and the buyer a percentage from every transaction. Boy, man, you can get rich doing that. And so if you use cash, it helps your vendor and it helps you, right? You don't lose that 1.5%, 2%, 3%. So I would use cash. And then the last thing is that my friend lives in Qatar. I have a friend lives in Qatar. He can't go out and buy. He's the one who introduced me to Bitcoin. He can't go out and buy Bitcoin in Qatar. Number one, they've put a block on the internet websites that do that. So they have a firewall that they can do. And then number two, when he does find a Bitcoin website, he doesn't trust it because there's a lot of scammers out there. So he is not able to access Bitcoin because of the location that we live in. So we live in a freer world here in America. But if the government, like I said, by regulation, if the government wanted to have an emergency currency act or any kind of, we need to help do the, stave off this soft landing and help the recession, you'll see it. You'll probably see it. And the other thing is they scare you out of it. I mean, the volatility is very scary. You don't want to be putting your money in Bitcoin. Tomorrow, put $30,000 and tomorrow it could be 24. Can you afford to lose the 6? So be very careful. I agree with the comments that the question that was made there in the comments. And of course, I love the Shaykh.
So we have this and maybe one more question. Brother Khalil, he asks, what will be the impact on us in America if most of the countries leave the dollar standard?
The dollar standard. So there is a move away from the dollar internationally. People have heard of the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Now they've got BRICS S. They've added a Saudi Arabia to it. Mohammed bin Salman is not taking calls from Biden. Biden had to get on a plane and go over there. It's interesting times we're in. And then after Biden left, Mohammed bin Salman got on a plane and visited Putin. I'm like, wow, the world is really changing here. And then China holds a lot of bonds, and they're doing bilateral trade deals I explained, with Pakistan. You don't have to go through the dollar. Pakistan and China are now doing deals with their currencies without the dollar. So that's called de-dollarization. There is that happening. But Jerome Powell made a very interesting comment. He said, we still have the markets, we still have the investment opportunities, and we still have the rule of law. If you put money in the stock market in Pakistan, I don't think you trust it the way you do in America. So we still have the rule of law. We still have opportunity here. And those little toddlers are falling faster than the giants. So the dollar is still going stronger in Pakistan. It's going stronger in Tunisia. Only in Russia and the large countries is it losing a little bit of its value. So I would say that the dollar will take years, a decade, for it to take its lumps the way we think it's going to take its lumps. It'll take its lumps in different ways, but it's going to be a slow demise. It's not like, oh my gosh, one day we're going to be like, hurting for dollars. No, I don't see that.
Okay, and this final question, you've partially answered this already, but I think there may be a little bit nuance involved here. But Brother Khalid mentions, of course, mashallah, we're also, it's great to see you as well, Brother Khalid. He mentions, he asked the question, have you had time to research digital currencies by central banks and talk of replacement of physical currencies? Is that realistic or not? For the most part, you've answered that question, but if you'd like to add anything, then go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, your Venmo and your Zelle, I mean, we're already doing it. Like, the future is here, right? The future is here. The question is, it's very risky because I can tell you, buy Bitcoin and Ethereum and Dogecoin and all this stuff. It's still speculative stage because the governments are onto what's happening, and they are trying to regulate the rules around who gets this stuff, and of course, how it gets regulated, how they get their hands on it, and how they can tax it. these are two very important things, right? Government, we want the government to tax because we get schools, we get roads, but we don't want the government to tax so they can build bombs, right? So we have a lot of advantages here. So digital currencies are going to be the future. There's a conference, I think in the next week, all the central bankers are going to Switzerland, and they're talking in the Swiss banks. And there's this thing called the FSB, the Financial Standards Boards, which is 20 of the largest central banks are talking about the future of digital money. And so there will be digital money in terms of like cash will go away. And the software that's going to run it is potentially things that are cryptocurrencies right now. So there are software companies that are like working on counterparty settlements, risk, that are going to be the Venmos. There's Plaid, and then there's Venmo, and there's Zelle, and there's all these companies that are known. Some of these companies are right now in the crypto space, and people are investing in them. And so it's real. It's here to stay. It's very risky. It's the wild, wild west. And be careful, but it is real.
Yeah. Well, alhamdulillah, barakallah fiqh. MashaAllah, that was great. Alhamdulillah, we're right here at the end of an hour and a half. And of course, there's much more that we could potentially talk about, but I think this is a very good introduction to the topic, and I hope that those who were able to tune in today, that you got a great benefit from it, that you see great benefit from it between today and yesterday as well. So we're going to, of course, be posting the videos later on, and please do support the Lamppost Education Initiative. I'd like to thank our guest, brother Zeshan Mukhtar, for being with us today. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he preserve you and continue to increase you and bless you and protect you, your family as well. And we look forward to having other opportunities as well to talk to you about this, or maybe something else, inshallah, some other related issues that sort of branch out from economics as well in the future. But really, really appreciate you taking the time out to be with us today. And we ask everyone to pray for us and our success and support us, and hopefully y'all can enjoy the rest of your weekend. Barakallahu fikum. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا وسبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بالعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر وسبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Walaikum.